All right. Well, welcome back to our conversation series on remote work. We are finally at our last pair of planned conversations for this series. Today, we will focus on the employee advantages of remote work. If you don't recognize me because of my fresh new haircut, my name is Ken Kahn. I am the Director of Partnerships and Collaboration at i Technologies, where we help people with video communications. As always, I'm here with my friend and colleague, the person you really want to see and hear from.
I'm Roxanne Glauser. I'm Director of Marketing and Learning with i Technologies. And in our conversation today about the employee advantages, we're just going to start with, I think it's the biggest one, Ken, right? No more commute. Would you be surprised that, now this is an average, okay, that the average one-way commuting time in the US, 27 minutes. Now this was in 2024. And so when you think of that as an hour out of your day, so if you're looking at each way, and some of the stats that we reviewed, commuters spend about 100 hours commuting and 41 hours stuck in traffic each year. Now, I know you know a little more about traffic, but we're actually getting traffic here in Waco as well, believe it or not, to where things that just, and we can't handle very much. We can't handle very much. So if it used to take us 10 minutes and now it's like 15, that feels significant to us. What would you say the Houston perspective on no more commute there?
Yeah, I mean, around here, it's almost like 30 minutes. It feels like to get to anything. I don't know why, but it always feels that way. But yeah, I would definitely put no more commute or rather short or different one up there as one of the biggest advantages. We'll be talking to one of about one of the advantages later that I put right up there with it. But if I had to pick one, yeah, no more commute is probably right there at the top. Anybody that's had to do any type of like long commute, so anybody that's probably had to experience the average, it's just yeah, it's one of those things where, and then with a commute too, you only have so much control, right? Because if there's an accident or there's road work or there's severe weather, I mean, that just makes things even worse.
Yeah, I remember when, I guess it was, oh, it's been several years back, and the organization I worked for, we had several people who would commute, over 30 minutes a day, one way. A couple were like 45 minutes. One person was almost at an hour. Part of the idea, they were like, oh yeah, it's time to relax. I can, kind of reset. And it was as podcasts and audiobooks were, just coming out. They were like, yeah, and I can fill my time with that. I would love to check in with them now to see if that still holds, or if they're like, yeah, most of what I was driving an hour to do, I could have done remotely. It would have been probably just as effective to connect in through Zoom to do that. What is your opinion? Because as we're looking at that commute time, and in my mind for remote work, I always picture it an urban commute with the traffic, right? With everything congested coming in. The other aspect would be some of our more rural areas, out West Texas, some areas there where you just have to cover the miles to get to wherever the place is. So you don't have the frustration of the actual congestion, but you've got the distance there. So I wonder if that probably plays into it as well too.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I was wondering, like, the people that didn't mind the commute, was it just it was a long commute, but not much traffic? Because that to me, that's a whole lot different. Like if I can just put on a podcast or an
Mhm.
audiobook and I'm just like, okay, I got 30 minutes till I get there, and it's kind of smooth sailing, even though it's 30 minutes. That's different than like 15 minutes of traffic or really I would, depending on how bad any type of traffic, like it's just that, like, I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, but like the gym I go to is literally like 5 minutes from my house, right? And there are times when I'm coming back from the gym where I'm like, just can you just go? Like, what's all this stopping? Like, you realize it's 50 miles an hour on this road, like, and I'm like, and they're almost thankfully almost every time I am aware of it. So like right like I'm like, what am like, okay, I have I don't have to be back at any specific time. Like what's my but it's still it's just it's kind of like a, you know, I can't even control, even though I'm aware of it, it still rises up in me when I'm like, what is like, and you start doing that, when you're driving, you start like, who is doing this? Like, who's causing this problem?
So the actual the research we saw, they were saying that it took like over 30 minutes of daily one-way commuting to be, associated with some adverse health effects. But you're telling me you can start to feel some of these like at 5.
Yeah, well, I would say, yeah, maybe I don't have the bad health effects because it's such a short period of time. It's not over a 30-minute period that I'm like freaking out the whole, trying to be like, stay calm, it's fine. You'll
Well,
get there when you get there.
once you get
Nobody's
the
sitting there looking at their watch when you walk in the door. Nobody's like has a notepad and they're like, mm-hmm. Nobody's
once you
doing
get
those
that
types of
stress
things to
response,
me.
it does take about an hour to come down. So, but yeah, that was really interesting when they were looking at commuting more than 10 miles each way associated with health issues like the higher cholesterol, elevated blood sugar, and even the increased risk of depression. I guess that's just the mental part of it. It is just so stressful. I know the major interstate that I travel is the highway of death, basically. It's pretty often there's an 18-wheeler on fire. There are people being, clipped and spun out, people going the wrong way. So it is super stressful to be actually on the highway. Just anytime you could reduce that, I think that it's got health benefits and all kinds of other things as well.
Just the fact that like some days there's some weather going on, right? It's stormy, rainy, it's cold, it could be icy, and it's, yeah, to not have to even worry about that stereotypical rush hour. It's around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and like I hear some storm raging and I'm like, so glad I don't have to like walk out in that right now. So yeah, I mean the commute, just the time saved alone. And the other thing we didn't even mention too, and I know we'll get into this further when we get further into some different benefits and things, but just the fact that like the majority of people, the vast majority of people, you don't get compensated for that commute time. And it can take you any, and if it's strict too, like where they're like, don't be telling us, you got stopped by a train, enough of that. If you're in the Houston area where I'm at, I mean, it literally, if there's no traffic, it might take you 20 minutes. If there's a little bit of traffic, it might be 30. If there's a lot of traffic, it might be 4, so there's a vast window. And if you just want to be like, I want to be certain that I'm going to get there in time no matter what, I mean, often in that rush hour time, you're having to give yourself like a 30-minute buffer just to make doubly sure that you're going to be there on time. And again, that's all time that's just eaten out of your own personal pocket, your own personal schedule, which, that stinks, especially when you consider like people that, I think that's a lot of the pushback on the return to office stuff is people that are like, okay, wait a minute here. I have to give all of I'm giving up a lot to come back into the office. So what am I getting in return? I think that's why that question always comes up of like, what is this about really? Or we talked about in the last conversation about the productivity. It's like, what is lacking on my part that I have to give up so much to go back into the office? I think it probably wraps us up in this first part, just talking about the commuting blend on the surface level. We're going to dig into next into some of those other associated benefits of not having to commute.